Hi, everybody. I'm Mrs. Stern, and today we're going to talk about vaccines. And so I brought a guest with me to talk about vaccines. This is Michael.
Hello.
Michael, who are you?
So I am Mrs. Stern's brother.
And what is your educational background and areas of expertise?
I have an English degree. I have an MFA in creative writing, and I'm a law student at Columbia in New York. So I am not an expert on vaccines.
He is not an expert on vaccines. He is, however, here in Minnesota because he is not in New York on account of coronavirus. But he is an educated citizen, and so he is here to talk with us about what vaccines are and what he knows about vaccines and to hopefully learn a little bit. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, what do you know about what a vaccine is?
Okay, so I know that a vaccine is you go to the hospital, they give you a shot. It immunizes you against disease.
What does that mean, that it immunizes you against disease?
It makes it so you're unable to get the disease that you're for which you are vaccinated.
So if you wanted to get a vaccine, would you want to get a vaccine probably like before you get sick, or when you're sick? Like, can you get if you get the flu, can you get a flu shot and will it make you better?
I do not believe so.
It will not. So that's the first thing that we all need to know about vaccines. I'm glad that Michael knows that because all educated people should know that. A vaccine prevents you from getting a disease. It makes you immune to a disease. It's a prevention against disease. It's not a cure for a disease. So yeah, if you have the flu, you have to just deal with having the flu. You should probably get your flu shot before you get the flu. What do you know about how vaccines actually prevent disease?
Okay, so I feel like I'm going to say a bunch of stuff that's wrong. You'll correct me then.
That's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
He took biology. Edina High School graduate. He knows
take
some
biology.
things about biology.
It's been a while though.
Yeah.
So I think that you get they basically inject dead cells of the bacteria or whatever it is that you're being immunized against into your bloodstream, and then your immune system practices fighting off the dead version of the disease, and then it is at that point equipped to fight off the live version of the disease if you encounter it.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Yeah, so let's
good.
unpack a little
All
bit
right.
about what that means to practice fighting the disease. Because yeah, it's pretty similar to how your immune system can learn how to fight diseases that you get. Do you know any diseases that if you get it, you won't get it again?
I think just seasonal strains of the flu, right?
Yeah. And
after you've had the flu once,
yeah.
you don't get it again that season.
Yeah, I actually don't know if that's true or not, because it might mutate I don't know if it mutates within the season, but probably that's true.
Okay.
And Michael and I both had the chicken pox.
Oh yeah, that's a better example.
Michael and I both had chicken pox about the same time when we were 3 or 4 years old. So probably in I don't know what year we would have had chicken pox, 1993, 1994, something like that.
Yeah.
And the vaccine for chicken pox was actually released in 1995. Did you know that?
I did not.
Yeah. Did you know there's a vaccine for chickenpox?
I did not.
Yeah. So there's
Wow.
a vaccine for chickenpox. So most of you guys have been vaccinated for chickenpox, and probably nobody in your generation really had it. But we're kind of the last generation that got chickenpox.
Oh.
Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy.
I know. So let's talk a little bit about how your immune system learns to fight disease. So here are some balls. These are Julie's. Julie's my 2-year-old daughter, so I borrowed these from her. So let's pretend these are germs, okay? All the germs, pathogens is the fancy word for germs, bacteria or viruses, have these little bumps on their surfaces. These are usually going to be proteins. And we refer to those when they're on a pathogen, we call these the antigens, okay? And so these specific proteins are unique for every different pathogen, and they kind of help your immune system to identify it, and your immune system then can tell the difference between your own cells and a pathogen. Okay, makes sense?
Right. Yep.
All right, so when you get sick, so if you get chicken pox, the first time you're exposed to it, your immune system kind of recognizes it with you have certain specific immune cells called B cells and T cells, and they will start to make proteins that help to fight disease. Do you know what those are called in your body? The things you produce.
The proteins?
To fight against a disease.
I know that white blood cells have something to do with your immune system.
So B cells and T cells are white blood cells. You've probably heard of antibodies before, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so antibodies are special proteins. So let's say this is chickenpox virus. So if you get exposed to chickenpox virus, your immune system will start to make antibodies, and then the antibodies will stick to it like this. All right. So there you go. These are my antibodies. Oh, that one fell off. We'll stick another one on. Okay, so once you mark the pathogen with antibodies, then this is sort of like a target for your immune system to fight it.
Okay.
Note to self, these, even when they have Scotch tape on them, do not stick very well to a fuzzy ball.
This one is sticking.
This one is sticking pretty good. Okay, so these would be, what are these?
Antibodies.
Antibodies. And antibodies, how do they get made?
I don't know. I don't remember. Sorry.
That's okay. The white blood cells, like the B cells and T cells.
Okay. They make them. Right.
Yeah. So your B cells and your T cells will make these antibodies, and then that will attach to like the chickenpox virus.
Yeah.
And then the cool thing about your immune system cells is that they'll remember how to make these antibodies. So if you get exposed to chickenpox again, you won't get it.
I see.
Okay. So that's like typically how your immune system learns to fight disease. But what you said is exactly right, that if you get a chickenpox vaccine, they're going to inject into you small amounts of either just the antigens from the virus or sometimes
the antigens are these bumps.
Yeah, these little bumps would be the antigens.
Okay.
So sometimes some vaccines just have the antigens, so they actually don't have full viruses in them at all.
I see.
And some vaccines will have a weakened virus that the whole virus is in there, but it's not in its full form that could cause disease. So it's it exposes your immune system, like you said, to the virus and teaches it how to fight it without causing the disease.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
All right. So these are the antibodies, right?
Yeah.
They're created
Hold
by...
it up so they can see it too.
These are the antibodies. They're created by white blood cells. So you said that they mark the virus for destruction.
Yeah.
What actually does the destroying?
Other white blood cells in the
white
immune
blood
system.
cells. Oh, okay.
Yeah. There's a bunch of different types of white blood cells in your immune system, and we're not going to get into all the detail of all the different names.
Okay, fair enough.
Yes. Okay. So, and the cool thing about antibodies too is that they're very specific to specific pathogens. So this could be a flu virus, and the chickenpox antibodies don't stick to this virus, and so you need different vaccines to help your immune system learn how to fight every different specific pathogen that we have figured out how to effectively vaccinate for. Okay. Make sense?
Yep, that makes sense.
All right, so that is kind of the basics of how vaccines work and how they teach your immune system to prevent disease. And so I wanted to talk with Michael a little bit about the history of vaccines, because it's kind of interesting to just know how long we've had this tool. So when do you think the first vaccine was invented, and do you have any idea of what disease it was for?
I know that Jonas Salk very famously invented the polio vaccine, but I feel like that's probably not the first one. That's just the only one that I know of.
I'm very impressed that you know that. We are going to talk about polio in a little bit. The polio vaccine was invented in 1957.
Right. That seems way too recent.
Yeah. So the very first vaccine was actually invented in 1798.
Whoa.
And it was for smallpox. Oh. And do you know anything about the story of how the smallpox vaccine was invented?
I do not.
I'm really glad you don't know anything about this. Okay. This is kind of a messed up story, because there wasn't really medical ethics back then. So this is a highly unethical story, but it is what it is. This is history of medicine, friends. Okay, so this guy, Edward Jenner, he was a doctor. And he was actually a medical student at the time in 1796. And he had made this observation that milkmaids did not get smallpox, at least not in the same level of virulence and as damaging of a disease as other people would get. Because at the time in the 1700s, smallpox killed, I read on one source, up to 10% of Britain's population at this time.
Wow.
A lot of people died from smallpox.
Very deadly disease.
Very deadly disease. You guys might have learned in U.S. history that smallpox was partly responsible for the deaths of lots and lots of Native Americans. Have you heard that? You remember learning about that in history?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the smallpox blankets.
Yeah. Very horrible.
That's a whole other thing. But because it was a disease that had been, in Europe for many centuries.
The British had built up a certain amount of immunity that the Native Americans didn't have.
Right.
Is my understanding.
Right. And so Edward Jenner noticed that milkmaids didn't really get smallpox. And so he had this hypothesis that maybe because they cows get a similar disease called cowpox. And so he hypothesized maybe the milkmaids were exposed to cowpox, and then that gave them a certain amount of immunity. Like it was teaching their immune system how to fight smallpox. And so he took an 8-year-old boy.
Yikes. I don't like where this is going.
It was the son of his gardener. So his a poor landless gardener.
Wow. Okay.
The 8-year-old boy. He basically like took a little bit of fluid from like a pustule of cowpox on this milkmaid, because like the milkmaids would sometimes get cowpox from the cows, which was not as deadly as smallpox. So he like put scratches on the boy's arm, and then he put the fluid from the milkmaid's cowpox pustule on the boy.
Right.
So basically like infected him purposefully with cowpox.
Right.
Yeah. And then the boy got like a little pustule, but then he healed. And then he infected him with smallpox.
To see if you would turn out okay.
This would not be okay today. Like you do not just infect people with smallpox.
Probably need to do like non-human clinical trials or something initially.
Right. And so, but the boy didn't get smallpox. So that was So that was in 1796. And so then, in 1798 was when the smallpox vaccine was created. And then there was lots of vaccine development kind of through the 1980s through the present. And that's, like you mentioned, the smallpox, or the polio vaccine. Being released in 1957. And you've probably heard of that, like with coronavirus, that there's kind of a search for, a race to get a coronavirus vaccine too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
But one of the things with vaccine development is that it takes, like, typically it's going to take many, many years, because they have to first figure out, like, what antigen do they want to use, like a weakened version of the virus, or are they going to use the antigen? Like, they have to figure out what they're going to put in the vaccine that's going to be effective. And then they have to first do animal trials. A lot of times they'll use mice or they'll use monkeys. And that can take, like, you have to go through a lot of, like, approval procedures, right? You have to, like, collect data and stuff.
So I suppose since you're like injecting the virus, I guess a dead virus into this, so is there like a risk that the vaccine could just like give the person the disease that you're trying to vaccinate against?
I think usually it's like less that, and it's more that the vaccine might just not be like potent enough to cause an immune response. And
to test whether it works or not, you have to give them the disease, and if the vaccine doesn't work,
well, and usually what they do, like, is, so they'll test in animals. Usually they'll like, they might sometimes like directly infect them with the disease, but with humans, it's not really ethical to do like what Edward Jenner did. So typically they'll do like a first phase trial where they have volunteers who get the after they've done trials to show that the vaccine is safe in animals and causes an immune response in animals. So there's like reason to believe that it'll be effective. Then they give a small group of humans the vaccine, and then they try to see, is it causing that immune response? As in, like, is their immune system actually creating the right antibodies? Okay. And then they have to kind of like let them go into the world for a while and see whether or not they get it, and do like
follow them for
check in with them and stuff, and see if they're like, statistically, are they more likely to be immune than other people? And then they do a second round where they do a larger group of people, and then they do the same thing, and statistically you have to see like, is this population of people that we vaccinated statistically more immune than other people? And then they do another bigger thing. So typically vaccine development is like a multi-year
Yeah, you can see why that would be a long, and then there's probably a regulatory component getting cleared with the FDA.
Right. And I read last week that like there's a hospital in Washington that started like the first phase for coronavirus. They have like a very small group, like, less than 10 volunteers who've been vaccinated with a like tentative coronavirus vaccine. But obviously we're still like, even though there's all this news every day about like we're racing for this coronavirus vaccine, it's a really long process to make sure you have an effective vaccine.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yes. So I don't think a vaccine is probably going to solve our problem for coronavirus in the near term, but
I see.
That's kind of how that works. So, all right. A little bit of trivia time now.
Ooh.
Trivia time.
All right.
Okay. Do you know